Look at Huawei, incredible. People in the government in the last 2 administrations ago thought they were going to hobble Huawei, come back stronger than ever, making incredible chips. 40, 50 years ago, the US led the world in global manufacturing of semiconductors. We made some of the components. And as a result, we woke up a few years ago realizing that 100% of every AI chip is made in Taiwan. It's utterly frightening. And by the way, you try to find a printed circuit board made in America, or a substrate, or a chemical, or certain forms of packaging. You can't do it, and it's dangerous.
大家好，今天和大家分享一段哈佛肯尼迪学院重磅论坛的完整对话节选。对话双方是前美国商务部长吉娜妻雷蒙多与知名经济学家劳伦斯萨默斯。雷蒙多曾全程主导拜登政府芯片法案落地，是美国产业政策一手操盘者。萨默斯曾任美国财政部长、哈佛校长，二人的对谈含金量十足。整场交流聚焦全球产业政策、半导体供应链安全、中美产业竞争、对华关税利弊、高端制造人才培养等核心议题。雷蒙多结合内阁任职一手经历，拆解美国产业政策出台的底层逻辑，不回避本国产业链空心化难题，也客观分析中美产业模式各自的优势与短板。诸多内部决策视角很难在其他公开访谈中见到。下面我们正式进入这场深度讨论。
China has a massively effective industrial policy. I mean, as I just said, I think it's amazing. It's stunning. I mean, anyone's been in a BYD car, it's a gorgeous car. Works really well. It's a beautiful thing. That's a direct result of Chinese, subsidy. Look at Huawei, incredible. People in the government in the last 2 administrations ago thought they were going to hobble Huawei, come back stronger than ever, making incredible chips. All because it's a champion company in the Chinese government. The list goes on. Biotechnology. I mean, they're really innovating in biotech, in quantum, because the government is pouring money into it like crazy. Also, another thing, a lesson that we could learn from China, they invest in the talent. China recently rolled out, I forget the exact number, but thousands of what we would call career and technical vocational schools. Like, the average age of a pharmaceutical worker in America is like 55. The average age of a plumber, welder, electrician is 50-something. Which now that I'm 54 sounds young, but we don't have an effective workforce system in this country. We don't. We incentivize attendance, Pell Grants, GI Bill, incentivize attendance. We send everybody to college. Lots of people don't graduate, or they graduate and they don't have skills for a job. China is incredibly intentional about a workforce strategy. We don't even teach molecular biology in most high schools, and yet we want to lead the world in biotech. So I think there's a lot we can learn from them. There are some experts here in rare earths. We just rode the elevator together. 40, 50 years ago, the US led the world in global manufacturing of semiconductors. We made some of the components. We made printed circuit boards in America. We mined in America. We had rare earth minerals, and we were mining. And we took our eye off the ball. In pursuit, the market said, pursue profit, pursue fatter margins, pursue efficiency at all cost. So that's what happened. And as a result, we woke up a few years ago realizing that 100% of every AI chip is made in Taiwan. It's utterly frightening. And by the way, you try to find a printed circuit board made in America, or a substrate, or a chemical, or certain forms of packaging. You can't do it, and it's dangerous. So we decided in that example, where national security was at stake, we had to intervene, and we did.
So you made a careful case for industrial policy, and there are a lot of economists who don't like industrial policy, but I think even the ones who don't like industrial policy would probably like the case that you just made. But the case is often made, and was sometimes made by the Biden administration, that manufacturing was good. That it was just really good to be manufacturing things, and that having a big manufacturing sector was really an important thing for a country, and that a country should focus on having a big, strong manufacturing sector for the sake of having a big, strong manufacturing sector, including the possibility that you might be able to convert it into doing military things if you had a war. But it was an argument that sort of manufacturing in general was a good thing that should be focused on. Is that your view?
Yeah, that is not my view. And I'm smiling because I would talk to the president about this. I don't know if Jake Sullivan's still here. And so, you know, the argument would go as such. It turns out I lost every time because I wasn't the boss. And today you have somebody else in the White House who I think would also say he wants to make everything in America. I don't agree, you know, by the way. I'm not going to get into the long list of things I don't agree with the current inhabitant of the Oval Office on. But I think I don't see a competitive advantage for us in making car seats for babies. I was with Doug McMillan recently at Walmart. He's like, it's just really hard to make these car seats in America for all these reasons. Trump is like insisting we make them in America. He said, fine, if you want me to do that, when the average mom or dad goes to Walmart, they're going to pay $600 for a car seat. I don't think that helps America. But there's no national security benefit for making car seats in America. I think by and large, we want the market to work. We want to specialize in what we are better at. And by the way, we want higher paying jobs. We want to make higher value things and higher paying jobs in America. But anyway, so that is my view.
How about, so no baby seats, no backpacks, no shirts.
Unless we could do it better, cheaper,
right, but
faster.
no, but we shouldn't tilt the playing field towards doing those things.
Yeah, fine.
How about, you know, there's lots of solar power and lots of people are putting solar collectors of one kind or other on the roof of their houses, and it's a good way of making electricity. Some people think it's terrible that we're not very competitive in manufacturing that stuff. Other people think it's better to be able to import it cheaply and have a lot of people install it. Which side are you on?
Well, I would say this. If it were a fair fight with China, we probably could compete. But China cheats and doesn't play by the rules. So if China, it's like EVs. It's like a little bit like electric vehicles. If China didn't massively subsidize by the state solar panels, the inputs to solar panels, the critical minerals and such that go into batteries, if they didn't, you know, the entire supply chain for Chinese EV companies is bought for by the Chinese government, essentially. So that is not free trade. You know, so I would say we need a system where if every country has to, you know, should play by the rules, we would have a fair fight and be able to produce more in America. Also, there is an argument that we have a national interest in moving more quickly to getting off of fossil fuels. And so to provide some economic incentive for companies to make these investments in something that's good for America, you know, I think that argument can be made.
I understand the second argument. I understand the first argument. I'm not sure I understand the second argument. Because if the argument is that we want to be off fossil fuels, that's great. So let's pay anybody who buys a solar collector, but put something on the roof, does something that's environmentally groovy. But that isn't an argument for subsidizing people to produce things that are environmentally groovy. If you want us to be green and not dependent on fossil fuels, I get why we should subsidize me if I make my house green. I don't quite get why we should why we should subsidize Professor Cutler if he decides to be in the business of producing green things.
The argument would be it's similar to the semiconductor argument, or actually what's happening right now in biotechnology. Once China decides that it's going to dominate the market in solar panels, the cells that go into solar panels, EV batteries, active pharmaceutical ingredients, it becomes almost impossible for anyone else to make them. So if you believe that these things are good for America, good for our economy, good for national security, good for our society, that in order to compete with that, you don't want to have to depend on them for 100% of those fill in the blank. So you want them to be made in America, so we don't have to rely on a critical thing, 100% from China. So putting a thumb on the scale. You know, by the way, like, listen, I'm the one that did industrial policy, and I'm the one who said to you it's really hard to do. I'm the one that fielded many phone calls from senators, from the White House, from congresspeople, from governors in swing states. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I try to shield my team, say no to the things I thought were bad investments. It is really hard. That being said, we've subsidized the airline industry forever. It's not that new that the US government has put a thumb on the scale in favor of industries that we thought were important, farming, et cetera. So I think it's a little dishonest to say this is a brand new thing. I'm not saying you're saying that, but I've heard that from a lot of people when I was trying to get votes for the CHIPS Act. And by the way, I heard that from a lot of conservative, Midwestern senators who'd be the first to vote for a farm bill and against chips, even though every chip in a quantum computer that the United States government is making, satellite equipment, drones, all the military equipment, CIA equipment, all made in Taiwan.
What would you have thought if the locus of global semiconductor production was kind of heavily in the Channel Islands or in Europe?
Yeah, look, in that instance, it's not nearly as urgent, but still urgent, because were there to be a hurricane in the Channel Islands, we'd be in big trouble. But maybe a good example for that is there's a company in the Netherlands called ASML. They make gigantic pieces of semiconductor equipment to do lithography, like as big as this room. And they're essentially the only company in the world that can make the most advanced of those machines. There's a company in Tokyo that has similar, but not quite as good, some other companies in the US. But ASML in the Netherlands, only in the Netherlands, can make this mother of a machine that nobody else can make, and you need it to make leading edge chips, AI chips. That is a problem. That is a vulnerability. Something happens to the ASML facilities, I don't know, someone takes over the Netherlands. Seriously, there could be an outbreak in the Netherlands. During COVID, we had so many problems with packaging plants in Malaysia. We ought to be focused on that. We ought to be doing something about that. I'll say a few things about this. Listen, both presidents, Biden and Trump, are not wrong that the way free trade played out hurt a lot of Americans and crushed certain regions of this country. Now, my own view is that that's not an argument against trade so much as it is an argument for truly free trade with countries that play by the rules and some genuine support to retrain, redeploy people who lost their job, which we didn't do. And so it's out of that desire, like that, when you go to these communities where I've been, like, it is horrible, like, to see empty building after empty building, and the rate of opioid deaths, it's, you know, you can't not want to do something, and tariffs make those imports more expensive. So President Biden kept a number of the tariffs. I think out of that instinct, I want to be on the side of the American worker. You know, I am not doing anything that puts even one American steel worker or manufacturing worker out of a job. I'm sticking up for the American worker. That was the reason to keep the tariffs in place. That's the theory. And like I say, in a way, that makes sense. But I just think that there are better ways to incentivize high-end manufacturing in the United States that will create better, higher-paying jobs for Americans than to simply say, you know, put a blanket tariff on every commodity that's coming in from China, which basically just is a tax on consumers who go to Walmart and pay $500 for a baby seat. The thing that I will also say, since this is a political, you know, Institute of Politics kind of event or political place, man, it's tough to take it. If you're a politician, it's tough to take a tariff off once it's on. You're going to be the one that says, I'm not sticking up for the American worker. Go ahead, flood the market with cheap imports. That's a tough political decision.
If I can just add one thing, depends on exactly how you do the numbers, but there are on the order of 100 times more people who work in industries that use steel as there are in industries that there are producing steel.
That's true.
As a calibration, the manicure industry is about 6 times as large as the steel industry in the United States. And so when you raise the price of steel, you have to think very hard about what you're doing to the aggregate number of manufacturing jobs, and you may often be reducing that number rather than increasing it. So some of these tariff policies are, I would argue, misguided, even if you accepted the premise that maximizing manufacturing employment was the right thing to do.
I think, can I just quickly respond to that? I think, so the thing that I really tried to pound the table on and was not successful was, let's not tariff inputs that come from China that go into things that we're trying to manufacture in America. There's a lot of inputs, for example, that come from China that go into a component, you know, that might go into an American car. And I say, Mr. President, we want to make more cars in America. It makes it more expensive to make the car in America. Exactly your point. But once again, it's very hard to take a tariff off. The difference between manufacturing and manicurists, no disrespect to manicurists, because that's an awesome thing to do, manufacturing does lead to research and development, which leads to more manufacturing, which leads to more research and development, which leads to more innovation. So there's lots of good reasons to think we want more manufacturing. And also steel, you can't be a strong country without some steel industry. And right now in this country, we have a single aluminum smelter left and a very dwindling steel industry. So once again, back to national security.
Wait, I can't resist. This is the first thing you've said that I've actually disagreed with.
Oh.
Only one, but it's the first thing you've said that I disagreed with.
What?
If we imported all our steel, and we imported it from 15 different countries around the world,
but
we took steel and we fashioned it into a thing, why isn't steel like cotton? I mean, I don't.
Fine, I'll give you that.
I mean, you said if we don't have a steel industry.
Okay, fine. But listen, but here's what I would say. That isn't the case.
Pretty close. pretty close in the case of steel. In the case of lots of things, you can argue that there's a point of vulnerability. But Canada, England, there are a lot of places we get steel from. You really want to argue that we're vulnerable because we don't produce enough domestic steel?
If I could be convinced that steel were truly as commoditized as cotton and were truly available from enough other countries, and that we could sufficiently spool it up, like if it were a commodity and we needed it in a time of war, then I would be with you.
听完这场雷蒙多与萨默斯在哈佛肯尼迪学院的完整对话，抛开他作为美国前内阁官员天然的本位立场，抛开整场对话里处处站在美国国家安全视角的预设，真正值得沉下心细细拆解、客观复盘的是他亲口讲出的一系列美国产业真实困境，以及他无法否认实打实落地的中国产业发展成效。我们先从他最核心的一个痛点说起，美国半导体产业链的全面空心化。雷蒙多自己清晰回顾40-50年前，美国牢牢把持全球半导体全链条优势，从晶圆制造、印刷电路板、配套特种化工材料，再到稀土勘探开采，全部产能都留在本土，完整产业闭环握在自己手里。但几十年间，资本只追逐短期高额利润，一切以极致低成本为导向，大批量制造环节持续向外转移，等美国回过神来才猛然惊醒。如今所有高端 AI 芯片全部依赖外部供应，想要找一条美国本土生产的电路板、半导体基板专用封装材料都难如登天。这种单一依赖带来的地缘风险、产业断供隐患，是推动拜登政府出台芯片法案最核心的底层动因。这里就引出整场对话最关键的分歧，到底什么样的产业政策才合理？拜登当时的思路很直白，希望美国本土生产所有商品，小到婴儿安全座椅、帆布背包、成衣衬衫，大到高端芯片，全部实现本土制造。但雷蒙多多次和总统争辩，并且始终没能说服对方。他的观点非常清晰，产业扶持不能一刀切，要区分产业属性。像婴儿座椅这类低附加值日用品，美国没有劳动力、成本层面的比较优势。如果强行靠政策、关税倾斜本土建厂，最终所有成本都会转嫁到普通消费者身上。沃尔玛平价安全座椅直接涨价数百美元，只会加重普通家庭生活负担。同时，这类商品和国家安全毫无关联，政府完全没有干预的必要。在他的逻辑里，政府出手干预、投放补贴、出台扶持政策，只有一条硬性标准：这件产业是否直接绑定国家经济安全、国防安全、半导体、关键生物医药原料药、稀土矿产、新能源、核心电池、量子技术、高端设备制造才属于干预范畴。只有当市场逐利选择造成国家关键领域彻底脱钩，形成致命依赖时，产业政策才有存在的意义。他也坦诚，产业政策执行难度极高，全国各地州长议员都会上门游说，希望为本州产业争取补贴，想要守住资金，只投真正具备战略价值的项目，需要持续顶住巨大的政治压力。同时，他也戳破一个双重标准的现实，很多中西部保守派议员一边反对芯片法案，一边年年投票通过农业大额补贴，双重标准本身就暴露了美国产业扶持政策的政治化弊端。接着聊聊他对中美产业模式客观无法回避的评价，他没有刻意抹黑，反而罗列了大量实际成果，认可中国产业政策的落地效果。新能源领域，比亚迪依靠长期产业扶持，打造出具备全球竞争力整车产品。通信芯片领域，华为在层层外部限制之下，依旧完成芯片自研突破。生物医药、量子科研领域，中国近20-30年持续加码投入，相关专利占比大幅提升，从早年全球占比1%攀升至30%左右。最让他羡慕的是中国系统性劳动力培养布局，国内开设成千上万职业技术院校，定向匹配高端制造、生物医药、精密加工等行业技能人才。反观美国，制药、焊接、电工、精密制造一线从业者平均年龄都在50岁上下。国内教育体系一味推崇综合大学深造，缺少衔接产业的技能培训通道。 产业人才断层问题持续恶化，短时间内很难弥补。然后是整场讨论争议极大的关税问题。雷蒙多坦言，拜登延续了特朗普时期大部分对华关税，但他本人并不认同一刀切加征关税的做法。核心矛盾十分现实，大量美国本土车企制造工厂生产所需基础原材料，中间零部件都需要从中国进口，对上游原料加征关税，直接抬高本土企业生产成本，最终反而会挤压美国制造业岗位。他曾经多次提议区分终端成品和上游工业原料，不对生产必需品加征关税，但这类提议很难通过。关税政策一旦落地，政客出于选票考量，几乎不会主动取消，取消就会被贴上不维护本国工人的标签，政治枷锁牢牢束缚政策调整空间。他还延伸谈到新能源赛道的竞争，太阳能光伏、动力电池如今中国占据全球主导地位，核心原因是长期体系化产业补贴。他承认单纯靠市场自由竞争，美国很难追上中国现有产能规模，但他的核心诉求是建立全球统一公平贸易规则，杜绝无限制政府补贴不平等竞争。同时他也抛出一个有意思的对比，哪怕是美国盟友荷兰的 ASML 光刻机，全球仅此一家能生产顶级光刻设备，单一产能源头同样存在巨大风险。自然灾害、区域突发状况都能直接冲击全球芯片生产，供应链多元化是所有工业国家的必修课，不能单纯把竞争焦点锁定在中国身上。对话中还有一组值得深思的对比，自由市场的局限与产业政策的边界，完全放任自由市场，资本逐利会主动剥离重资产，长周期的战略制造业最终造成国家安全层面的致命短板。可如果政府无差别干预所有制造行业，违背比较优势，又会推高通胀，拖累民生。雷蒙多给出的折中路线是区分赛道，只在关键战略领域适度托底，其余行业交给市场自由竞争，依靠自身优势发展。这也是他操盘芯片法案的核心思路。同时他也反思美国产业政策短期化问题严重，4年一轮选举周期，很难支撑20-30年长期科研投入，而中国产业规划具备极强延续性，能够持续深耕芯片、生物、新能源这类回报周期漫长的行业，这是美国体系天然短板。另外他也聊到美国盟友关系对产业布局的重要性，他直言当下美国部分对外政策正在疏远欧洲、东南亚、日韩等伙伴，而中国长期深耕全球各国经贸、产业合作，持续和各国建立产业连结。如果美国一味采取孤立式美国优先，放弃协同盟友搭建多元产业链，最终会独自承担全部产业竞争压力，丧失合作优势。他期待美国能以伙伴身份联合盟友协同布局关键产业，而不是单方面设置贸易壁垒，切断合作通道。在快问快答环节的一系列观点，更能直观看出他的政策底线：高端半导体。前沿生物技术会限制对华技术外流，但基础物理、量子相关基础学科允许中国留学生赴美学习，单纯民用消费品不会全面封锁，但具备战略属性的中国电动车互联网平台会加以约束。它的底层逻辑很清晰，区分民用普通领域和国防，前沿高端战略领域不搞全面脱钩，但关键技术必须守住自身优势。综合整场论坛全部内容，我们能清晰看到两套经济发展路径的优劣势。美国依靠成熟资本市场，前沿基础科研优势，但自由市场导向、短期选举周期、人才断层、产业空心化、政策政治化一系列问题，不断削弱自身高端制造根基。中国依靠长期稳定产业规划，完整上下游产业链，系统化人才培养，持续长期科研投入，在新能源、通信、生物等前沿赛道快速追赶。两种模式没有绝对好坏，但各自都有需要补齐的短板。我们看待这场对话也要保持辩证视角。雷蒙多所有观点出发点始终是美国国家利益，部分判断带有西方固有认知偏差，不必全盘认同。但他作为前商务部长披露的美国产业内部真实困境、政策推行中的内部矛盾， 中美产业客观差距都是极具参考价值的一手内部视角，能帮我们跳出单一宣传视角，更客观看清全球产业竞争的真实格局。这期论坛完整内容到这里就全部分享完毕，整理完整对话，梳理拆解观点，耗费了大量时间和精力。如果这期内容对你理解全球产业政策、中美产业竞争有帮助，欢迎点赞订阅本频道。如果你有不同的思考看法，都可以在评论区理性留言交流，每条评论我都会认真阅读。我们下期再见。